I was hosting the biggest Halloween party of the year, something I'd planned for weeks. The house was decked out in cobwebs, flickering lights, and all kinds of spooky decorations. Guests arrived in full costume, witches, vampires, ghosts, the whole deal. It was the kind of night where everyone got into the spirit, laughing, drinking, and posing for photos. It was perfect. But then I noticed something, or rather, someone. Amid the crowd of lively, costumed partygoers, there was one guest who stood out, and not in a good way. This person, dressed in a full black robe and wearing a silver mask that covered their entire face, wasn't mingling like the others. They didn't dance, laugh, or even drink. Instead, they just stood there watching. At first, I didn't think much of it. It's Halloween, after all, and people love to go for that mysterious, creepy vibe. But as the night went on, that unsettling feeling wouldn't go away. Every time I glanced around the room, there they were. Silent, unmoving, always just on the edge of the crowd. It was like they were observing more than participating. I thought about going up to them, introducing myself, but then I got distracted by other guests. Drinks spilled, the music was pumping, and I had to manage everything. About an hour later, the vibe of the party shifted. I started hearing murmurs from some of my friends. Small things were going missing: phones, keys, even someone's wallet. At first, people brushed it off, thinking they'd just misplaced them in the chaos of the party, but it kept happening, and everyone started getting a little on edge. I tried to keep things light, suggesting people retrace their steps, but deep down, I had a bad feeling about it. My mind kept circling back to that silent figure in the silver mask. They'd been in the corner of the room earlier, but now, they were gone. I asked a few friends if they knew who it was, thinking maybe I'd missed someone adding a last-minute guest, but no one seemed to know. That's when the creeping unease turned into real fear. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the guest list again just to be sure. Their name wasn't on it. They weren't supposed to be here. My heart started pounding as I quietly searched the downstairs rooms. The kitchen, the living room. Empty except for the other guests. No sign of the masked figure. I even checked the bathrooms, but they were nowhere to be found. That's when I realized I hadn't checked upstairs. I felt a sinking feeling in my gut as I headed toward the staircase. Most of the guests were still downstairs, lost in the music and conversation, but I couldn't shake the fear that something was very, very wrong. I climbed the stairs, my pulse racing in my ears, trying to stay calm, telling myself I was overreacting. The upstairs hallway was dark, only lit by the dim glow from the jack-o'-lanterns we'd placed in the windows. As I made my way toward the guest bedroom, I could feel the tension building with every step. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and there, standing in the corner of the room, was the figure in the silver mask. My breath caught in my throat. They hadn't moved since I'd entered, just stood there, silent, watching. I don't know what I expected them to do: laugh, pull off the mask, say something. But they didn't. The silence was suffocating. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Hey, who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're not on the guest list." Nothing. I took a step closer, my hands trembling. "This isn't funny. You need to leave." Still nothing. My heart was hammering in my chest now, but I had to know. I reached out, my fingers brushing the edge of their sleeve, but before I could pull the mask off, they turned and bolted, running toward the door. I stumbled back, completely caught off guard as they slipped past me and out into the hallway. I yelled after them, running to the top of the stairs. But by the time I got there, they were already gone, disappeared into the crowd of costumed guests downstairs. Panic surged through me as I rushed down, pushing through the party, frantically scanning faces. But it was impossible to tell who was who in the sea of masks and costumes. I called out to a few friends, explaining what had happened, but no one had seen the figure leave. It was like they'd vanished into thin air. The party died down after that. People were uneasy, some even left early. We never found the missing items, and that figure in the silver mask, they were never seen again. The next morning, I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just some weirdo who'd snuck into the party for a prank. But then, as I was cleaning up, I found something chilling. Lying on the guest bedroom floor, right where the masked figure had been standing, was a knife. Halloween had always been my favorite time of year, especially now that I had a daughter, Lily, who was old enough to really enjoy it. She was 6, and she'd been talking about her costume for weeks. A princess, of course. I'd taken her trick-or-treating every year since she could walk, and each year we'd come home and sort through her candy together, laughing about the weird costumes and spooky decorations we'd seen. It was a tradition, something simple and fun. But this year would be different. We got home that night, Lily exhausted but still giddy, clutching her overflowing candy bag. My wife was out of town for work, so it was just the two of us. After getting her into her pajamas, I set her up on the couch with a movie, and I started my usual routine, checking her candy piece by piece. It was something I'd always done, not because I ever expected anything to be wrong, but because, as a parent, you just want to be sure. At first, everything looked fine, mini chocolate bars, lollipops, the usual. But then I pulled out a small bag of gummy bears and something made me pause. The packaging looked off. It wasn't torn exactly, but there was a small puncture near the top, as if someone had poked it with a needle. I frowned, set it aside, and kept going. Then I found another. A chocolate bar, slightly crumpled, with a tiny hole in the wrapper. I pressed on the candy inside and noticed it felt softer than it should have, like it had been tampered with. My heart started to race a bit, but I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe it got crushed in her bag, or maybe I was just being paranoid. But then I found a third. A small piece of hard candy, the kind that usually comes in a clear wrapper. This one had been unwrapped and poorly rewrapped, as if someone had taken it out and hastily tried to cover it up again. My gut told me something was seriously wrong. 3 pieces of candy, all from different types of packaging, and all with signs of tampering. It couldn't be a coincidence. I looked over at Lily, her eyes half closed as she watched the movie, oblivious to the fact that something sinister might be lurking in her candy bag. I carefully put the suspicious candy aside and started thinking. Where had we gotten these? We'd hit a dozen or so houses, all in the neighborhood. It had been the usual crowd. Families, older folks handing out candy, even the new couple who'd just moved in a few months ago. Nothing had seemed out of the ordinary. But then I remembered something. There was one house a little further down the street toward the cul-de-sac that we almost hadn't gone to. The lights were off, and it didn't seem like anyone was home. But just as we were about to skip it, the door creaked open and Mr. Rourke, our neighbor, stepped out. He'd given Lily a handful of candy, smiled, and wished us a happy Halloween. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time, but now, as I stared at the candy in front of me, a chill ran down my spine. I checked the wrappers again, and sure enough, all 3 pieces, the gummy bears, the chocolate, and the hard candy, had come from Mr. Rourke's house. My stomach dropped. Rourke wasn't just some random guy on the street, he was a family friend. We'd known him for years, even invited him over for dinner a few times. He was always friendly, always helpful. But now, I didn't know what to think. I grabbed my phone and called my wife, explaining what I'd found. She was quiet for a long time before finally saying, "You need to take that to the police. Right now." I glanced over at Lily, who was now dozing off on the couch. "But it's Rourke. Why would he?" "I don't know," my wife said, her voice strained. "But you can't take any chances. Not with Lily." I hung up and stared at the candy, my mind racing. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was overreacting. But then again, what if I wasn't? The next morning I went straight to the police station. I handed over the candy, explaining what I'd found. They took it seriously, more seriously than I'd expected. They told me they'd have it tested and that I'd done the right thing. Later that week, the test results came back. The candy had been laced with a sedative. Not enough to kill, but enough to knock a small child out. My heart sank when they told me. But what really made my blood run cold was what came next. The police had questioned Mr. Rourke. At first, he'd denied everything, but eventually they found evidence. More tampered candy in his house hidden in the back of a closet. When they dug deeper, they discovered something even more disturbing. He'd been keeping notes, Detailed notes about Lily, her routine, her favorite toys, even what she liked to eat. It wasn't just a random act of cruelty. It was targeted. And it wasn't just Lily. He'd been watching other kids in the neighborhood too. They arrested him that same day. I'll never forget the moment I realized how close we'd come to something far worse than a ruined Halloween. The fact that someone we knew, someone we trusted, could have hurt my daughter. It still haunts me. And now, every year, when Halloween rolls around, I check every single piece of candy. Twice, because you never really know what kind of monsters are lurking behind the masks. Halloween had always been our favorite night of the year. It was the one night where we could get away with almost anything, and no one would bat an eye. For years, my friends and I had built a reputation around town for our elaborate pranks. Jump scares, fake blood, creepy masks, you name it. But this year we wanted to take things to the next level. We wanted to pull off something so intense, so terrifying, that people would be talking about it for months. The plan was simple. We were going to scare the hell out of Tom, a quiet kid who never really hung out with anyone. He lived in a small house on the edge of town, and we figured it would be the perfect spot for our prank. We'd make it look like a home invasion. Burst in wearing masks, make a bit of noise, then disappear before he could figure out what was going on. Tom would freak out, and we'd have it all on camera for the ultimate Halloween scare. I should have known from the start that something wasn't right. We gathered at my place before heading to Tom's, each of us equipped with masks, flashlights, and some props to make it look as real as possible. Fake knives, rope, and even a plastic crowbar. Jake, who was always the one pushing the limits, suggested we stage a kidnapping scene. We'd tie Tom up, pretend we were taking him somewhere, then let him go when the prank reached its peak. It sounded extreme, but that was the whole point. As we approached Tom's house, my stomach started to churn. I figured it was just nerves, but looking back, I wish I'd listened to that feeling. It was almost midnight when we pulled up. The street was dark, the houses spaced far apart, and no one seemed to be around. Tom's house sat quietly at the end of the road, a single porch light flickering, the perfect setting for our twisted plan. We parked a few houses down and made our way to the backyard, crouching low to avoid being seen. Jake was in charge of getting inside. He had somehow gotten a hold of a spare key to Tom's house, something he wouldn't tell us how he'd managed. I thought it was a bit too far, but by then we were already committed. The back door creaked as we slipped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear Tom moving around upstairs, probably getting ready for bed. We whispered to each other, putting the plan in motion. Jake would rush upstairs and pretend to hold him at knife point, while the rest of us created a ruckus downstairs, knocking things over, making it sound like a real break-in. Everything was going fine until it wasn't. We heard a crash from upstairs, followed by a thud. I froze, flashlight shaking in my hand. There was no scream, no shout, just silence. "What the hell was that?" I whispered to Jake, but he didn't answer. Moments later, Jake stumbled down the stairs, pale as a ghost, his hands trembling. "We need to get out of here. Now." "What happened?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. I don't know," he stammered. "He just fell. I think he hit his head." The air felt thick, heavy with fear. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I ran upstairs, barely able to breathe. When I reached Tom's room, my blood ran cold. Tom was lying on the floor, motionless, his head bleeding from where he'd hit the dresser on his way down. "We have to call someone," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake shook his head. "No way. If we call someone, we're screwed. We're already in deep enough as it is." I knew he was right. If the cops showed up, we'd all be in serious trouble. It wasn't just a prank anymore. It was an accident. But no one would believe that. Reluctantly, we dragged Tom onto his bed, covering him with a blanket to make it look like he was asleep. I felt sick to my stomach the entire time. Jake kept telling us it would be fine, that Tom would wake up with a nasty bump on his head and never remember what happened. But as we left the house, something shifted. The night, which had already felt wrong, now felt suffocating. We heard footsteps behind us, but when we turned, There was no one there. The trees rustled in the wind, and every creak, every sound felt like it was coming for us. We ran to the car and sped off, trying to put as much distance between us and Tom's house as possible. That's when the text started. First, it was from an unknown number. "You think you can get away with this?" We all assumed it was someone from school, a friend of Tom's who was in on the prank. But then the messages got more specific. "I saw what you did," the next one said. "You left him there." Our group chat lit up with panic. Jake tried to shrug it off, saying it was probably Tom messing with us, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. None of us had told anyone what happened. No one could have known, unless someone was there. That night, none of us slept. The texts kept coming, each one more threatening than the last. "You're next." We didn't know if it was Tom, if he'd somehow woken up and figured it out, or if it was someone else. Maybe one of us had snapped under the pressure, or maybe, just maybe, we weren't the only ones in that house that night. The next morning, we found out Tom had been rushed to the hospital. He'd woken up confused, bleeding, with no memory of what happened. The text stopped after that, but I can still hear the faint sound of footsteps following me, a reminder of the night our prank went horribly, horribly wrong. Every town has that house, the one everyone whispers about, the one where no one ever goes willingly. Ours sat at the edge of town, hidden by overgrown trees and a crumbling iron fence. For as long as I could remember, kids would dare each other to break into the old place on Halloween night. They'd sneak inside, maybe stay long enough to snap a picture, and then bolt out, terrified by their own imaginations. The house was more of a legend than anything real. Rumors of it being cursed, haunted, or worse. I never took the bait. I wasn't exactly into spooky stuff, and there was always something about the place that felt off. But this year, my friends, Chris and Jenna, had other plans. They wanted to break in and spend the night there because apparently just going in and running out wasn't enough for them. They wanted to up the stakes, see who had the guts to last until sunrise. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. How bad could it be? We packed a couple of flashlights, some snacks, and set off just after dark. The air was cool, and a thin mist clung to the ground as we made our way through the woods that bordered the property. When we finally reached the house, it was even more unsettling than I'd remembered. Dilapidated, with broken windows and a sagging porch, the whole place practically groaning with decay. "This is gonna be awesome," Chris said, grinning as he pulled out his phone to take a picture. Jenna laughed, but I just stood there, staring at the broken front door, hanging loosely on its hinges. "Come on, let's get this over with," I muttered, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. We pushed the door open and it let out a long, high-pitched squeak that echoed through the house. Inside, the place was a wreck. Dust and debris covered the floors, and the stench of mildew hung heavy in the air. The walls were cracked, and bits of the ceiling had fallen to the floor in jagged pieces. Every step we took stirred up a cloud of dust. "Okay, we'll just check out a few rooms, maybe take some pics, and we're good," Jenna said, her voice bouncing off the walls. But as we ventured deeper, something felt wrong. It wasn't just the creaks and groans of the old house settling. It was something else. It felt like the house was watching us, waiting. We reached what looked like the living room, an old broken-down couch, a fireplace caked in ash, and a half-collapsed coffee table. Chris flopped down on the couch, kicking up dust. "See? Nothing to it," he said with a smirk. That's when Jenna noticed something. Guys?" We turned to see her pointing at the far corner of the room, where a pile of old newspapers and debris had been pushed aside, revealing a sleeping bag, a fairly new one. "What the hell?" I whispered. It wasn't just the sleeping bag. There was an empty can of food, a half-filled water bottle, and a crumpled hoodie tossed on the floor. Whoever had been staying here wasn't from decades ago. They were here recently. "Maybe it's some homeless guy," Chris said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "That's not all," Jenna added, holding up a small, battered notebook. "I found this near the bag." She flipped it open, revealing pages filled with cramped, messy handwriting. As we scanned the pages, it became clear that these weren't just random notes. They were diary entries, disturbing ones. The writer talked about watching people from the house, listening to their conversations, following them without being seen. They detailed the times they'd stayed hidden while teenagers broke in on dares, quietly observing from the shadows. "They know we're here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Chris snatched the notebook from Jenna, flipping through it with wide eyes. "This is insane. We gotta go." We turned to leave, but that's when we heard it. The soft sound of footsteps above us. Slow. Deliberate. "Was that you guys?" Jenna asked, her voice shaky. None of us answered. The footsteps grew louder, closer, as if someone was creeping down the stairs. My heart hammered in my chest as we all froze, staring at the staircase across the room. A shadow passed through the hallway at the top of the stairs. Then, without warning, the old staircase creaked as something started descending step by step. I bolted for the door, the others right behind me. We crashed through the front door, stumbling over the porch steps as we ran into the night. But as we reached the edge of the property, I made the mistake of glancing back. Standing in the doorway was a figure, tall, thin, with wild hair and dark eyes that glinted in the moonlight. He wasn't some vengeful spirit or ghost. He was real, and he was watching us. His lips curled into a smile that chilled me to the bone. We didn't stop running until we made it back to Chris's car. My hands shook as I fumbled with the door handle, and once we were inside, we peeled out of there as fast as we could. None of us spoke on the way home, the reality of what we'd seen settling in. Someone had been living in that house, watching the people who dared to venture inside, watching us. I don't know who that man was, or how long he'd been there, but I do know one thing. We weren't the first to break into the abandoned house on the edge of town, and we definitely won't be the last. But next time, whoever goes in might not make it out. Halloween's always been my favorite night of the year. The costumes, the parties, the chance to just let loose and be someone else for a night. This year, my friends and I decided to go as a group of characters from our favorite show. Matching costumes, bright wigs, the whole shebang. I went as the lead character, a quirky, colorful girl with pigtails and a rainbow outfit. We spent weeks planning it, and I was ready for a wild night of fun. The first party we hit was packed. Music blasting, people everywhere. I was buzzing with excitement, moving through the crowd with my friends when I spotted something strange. A girl across the room wearing the exact same costume as me. I laughed, pointing it out to my friends. "Hey, look, I've got a twin," I said, waving at her. She didn't wave back. Instead, she just stood there staring at me. Her expression was hidden behind the thick makeup and oversized sunglasses that matched my own, but something about her stance made me uneasy. "Must be a coincidence," my friend Jess said, shrugging it off. "It's a popular character. Let's grab some drinks." I tried to brush it off too. It was Halloween after all. People wore similar costumes all the time, but throughout the night I kept seeing her. No matter where we went in the party, by the punch bowl, out on the dance floor, she was always just there, standing, watching. When we left the first party to head to another one down the street, I thought that would be the end of it. But when we walked into the next place, I spotted her again. Same costume, same stare. And this time, she was closer. My friends noticed my growing unease. "You all right?" Jess asked, nudging me as we stood near the bar. "Yeah, I think so," I replied, but my voice wasn't convincing. "It's just, she's here again. The girl in the same costume. It's weird, right?" Jess rolled her eyes playfully. "It's Halloween, relax. Maybe she's just trying to win a costume contest or something." I nodded, forcing a smile. But deep down, something was gnawing at me. This wasn't just a coincidence anymore. At the third party, things got worse. We were dancing, having a good time when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around expecting to see Jess or one of my other friends, but instead it was her, my doppelganger, standing way too close, her breath hot on my face. Up close, her makeup was smeared, her wig slightly askew, giving her an eerie, unhinged look. "Nice costume," she said in a low voice, her smile too wide, too forced. "Looks familiar." I stepped back, my heart pounding. Thanks," I mumbled before turning and grabbing Jess's arm. "We need to go." Jess could see I wasn't joking around anymore, so we grabbed the others and headed outside. The night air was cold and I took a deep breath, trying to shake the fear that had settled in my chest. My friends were laughing, talking about the party, but I couldn't focus. We were halfway to the next house when I spotted her again. She was standing at the end of the block, leaning against a streetlight, watching us. Watching me. "Okay, this is getting freaky," I whispered to Jess. "She's following us." Jess frowned, finally starting to take me seriously. "You sure? Maybe it's just a coincidence?" "No, it's not," I said, my voice shaky. "She's been everywhere we've gone tonight." Jess glanced back toward the girl, who had now stepped away from the streetlight and was walking toward us, her head tilted slightly like she was amused by the whole situation. "Let's go," Jess said quickly, pulling me along with the group. We moved faster, trying to lose her in the crowded streets filled with trick-or-treaters and other partygoers. But no matter how many turns we took, she was always there. Always a few steps behind, never too far away. At the last party of the night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed Jess and told her I was leaving. "This isn't fun anymore," I said. She's got it out for me. I can feel it." Jess didn't argue this time. "All right, let's call it a night. We'll head back to my place." We left the party, heading toward Jess's apartment, but halfway there, I stopped dead in my tracks. Ahead of us, standing in the middle of the sidewalk, was the girl in my costume. But this time, she wasn't alone. 2 other figures, both in dark hoodies, flanked her. My stomach dropped. "Jess." Jess grabbed my arm. "Run." We bolted, sprinting down the street as fast as we could. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear their footsteps, heavy, fast, gaining on us. My heart pounded in my ears as we turned corner after corner, desperate to lose them. Finally, we ducked into a side alley, pressing ourselves against the brick wall, trying to catch our breath. "Who the hell is she?" Jess gasped, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know," I whispered, my body trembling. "But I think she's been following me all night." Just then we heard the footsteps again, this time slow and deliberate. They were coming down the alley. We had nowhere to go. I pressed myself harder against the wall, trying to make myself invisible, as the figure in the costume slowly came into view, her smile still plastered on her face. "Found you," she said softly, stepping closer. Jess and I froze, paralyzed with fear. But just as she reached for us, a car pulled into the alley, its headlights blinding us all. The figure stopped, hesitating for just a moment, before turning and disappearing into the shadows. We didn't wait to see where she went. We ran the rest of the way to Jess's apartment, locking the door behind us, our hearts racing. The next morning, I called the police, but they didn't seem to take me seriously. "Just a Halloween prank," they said, "nothing to worry about." But I knew better. Whoever that girl was, she wasn't just playing a prank. She had been following me all night, tracking my every move, and I still don't know why.